So the one thing we did on Friday was identifying why a worldview matters. So I'll bring that up first, and then we'll move on to the elements. And it wouldn't hurt to even bring up some of these questions on Friday. In other words, when we have open or free-floating discussions, I don't want it to be just a mass of opinions. Remember, I said your opinion has to be substantiated, which makes it more than a mere opinion. So the last part here, why worldviews matter. Remember, I said it shapes most of the things in our lives. It shapes our understanding of the human person, our view of morality, our concept of love. It influences our politics, and it determines the purpose of art. Those are only a handful. It's not exhaustive. There's really nothing that it doesn't affect. And if you recall, I used the image of swimming in cloudy water. You can imagine when you're in water, there's no part of you that is not somehow affected by it. And you don't always recognize it as it being cloudy, being immersed in the culture. But once you see clear water, you know what cloudy water looks like. Once you step away far enough to analyze our culture and just accept and realize it hasn't always been like this, then we can look at things differently. What the purpose of this is for us to not be blindsided, not to be dead wood floating down a stream. In other words, everybody likes to think that you've arrived to your conclusions on religion, the human person, all these things on your own. But when you find that your opinion is no different than the majority of the people that are alive today, which is different than the majority that were alive 100 years ago, all of a sudden you're not feeling so unique. And if you can't ferret out why is it that I agree with everybody else, what is influencing my opinions on these things, we're never really going to be able to reach out and be independent thinkers and critical thinkers. Okay? So that's the goal of some of this. So what I have is I have 5 elements. Some of these come from a book. This woman is actually an art critic. I just put that there. You do not need to know it. But I don't want anybody to think that this is all entirely, original Hoyle stuff. So it has Modernism Failed by Susie Gallick, all right? And she's an art historian. So the first one is individualism. Now, here's the thing. There's always good aspects to this stuff. So it's not like we're talking about big evils here. We're just trying to say, what is it that influences us? What is it with individualism, right? So here's what I mean. You see in my note-taking, desires for you, I always have something up there, and then there's the ... Well, what's up there is going to be available to you throughout at least the period of class while that slide's up, but I'm also going to record it and put it online. So you always have access to that material. You're not always going to have access to my commentaries after it. So sometimes, as a strategy, if you can't write that down quickly, leave it blank. And you could always fill that in later, because what I find is some students are so busy writing that down, they're not listening to me, and then they have no idea what the point is that I'm trying to make, okay? So however you want to manage it, see how you do. But that's just a little hint. All right, so anyway, there's an emphasis on personal goals and interest, right? And those personal goals and interests then have a priority over larger social concerns. So we're always, we get overly concerned with what is it that I need. And I've already talked about this briefly last week when I said when I was in college, I was almost a single-issue voter thinking I want to vote for the politician that's going to either, lower the interest rates and or give me an opportunity for more financial aid. That's not a bad thing. But when I start focusing on how everything affects me, I'm starting to enter this individualistic understanding of society. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, was that like Reagan or Clinton?
That would have been with Reagan. Okay, that would have been with Reagan. So this would have probably been like a Reagan-Mondale thing. Yeah. And again, there's nothing wrong, right, for a college student to want to see, some sort of, tuition assistance, some sort of tax reduction. Not tax reduction, I'm sorry. Low interest in the loans. But, we have to weigh many things. And an individual is only going to look at those things primarily, okay? And that's not a definition. I'm not trying to give you a comprehensive definition. One other thing that I realize in theology is it's very abstract. Abstract does not mean obscure, okay? Abstract means that these things are sometimes pulled apart. And you have to be able to follow through an argument. And what you're hearing up here is sometimes the conclusion of an argument, and it doesn't always sound convincing to you. That's okay. You know, we'll talk about that later. So if my little blurb on individualism doesn't seem comprehensive, it's not supposed to. If me, by listing a few effects of individualism on our culture and worldview, doesn't seem convincing, that's okay. These are the answers. So if you were in a math class and I was working on a problem that was very difficult, and you argued the answer, but you didn't know how I got to that answer, you'd have to ask yourself first, maybe I should see if I made my mistake in the stages of the question, as opposed to the answer itself. Okay. So anyway, one of the effects of individualism is that traditions and rituals, they seem primitive, all right? They seem archaic. And I use the example of the guard of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. You know, if you don't understand the significance, if you don't understand, you know, the importance of the symbolism there, then what you're just seeing, it seems just mechanical. And eventually, you're going to wean away from that, and it's no longer going to have any importance in your life. So individuals don't look always to tradition and rituals as preserving something from the past. It almost seems like it's archaic, and we want to be more progressive. We want to move forward. Okay. An increase in egoism, that's obvious, right? We could talk quite a bit about narcissism and the rise in that. That's not important. But we do see a rise in narcissism and egoism. And pleasure and pain, then, become the way we choose actions, whether it's morality or not. In other words, we do those things that are pleasurable for us, and we avoid those things that bring ourselves pain. Now, you might be thinking, well, who wouldn't do that, right? Well, if you go through life trying to increase your pleasure and trying to decrease your pain, it's a very hedonistic worldview. For instance, who would die for their country if they weren't willing to put their own lives at stake, their own pleasures at stake, and not avoid pain at the expense of truth? There's always something that's going to give, all right? So we have to look again for the person who holds honor higher than their own lives. Why is it that people would cheat in marriages? Why is it that people would cheat on assessments? Well, because, well, let me bring up the next one because it kind of fits in. It's because our ethics tends to be utilitarian. Now, I'll talk more about this next semester in morality, but utilitarian ethics, you know, real broadly means the end justifies the means. Okay? So we're not looking so much as how we achieve something, but the fact that we did achieve it. So a person who's very individualistic, you know, may not look at, you know, at the person they're married to in the same way. Well, let me say it this way. They may ask themselves questions, well, this person doesn't fulfill me. They don't allow me to self-express. So I'm going to see, so if I find a love and a connection with emotionally with somebody outside of that marriage, then I'll have an affair. They might intellectually know the affair is wrong, but they're feeling fulfilled emotionally. And they feel like this person really gives them a sense of worth. So the end, that sense of worth and love, justifies them having an affair. In school, a person who cheats on an exam or some sort of assessment, they know intellectually that's wrong. But they, you know, rationalize it. Like, well, is it that really big of a deal? I'm going to get a good grade. I'll get into a good school. So they look at those goals, right? They're maximizing their pleasures and minimizing their pain. They don't really talk about things like honor and commitment and personal integrity, because honor and commitment and personal integrity will probably ask you sometime to suffer through pains for greater causes. You wouldn't have civil rights leaders if it wasn't the fact that they say, I'm willing to experience pain for something greater, okay? So an individual is going to say, how does this affect me? A person opposed to individualism would say, what's better for all of us, okay? So this is only really a real brief cap on this stuff. I'll talk more about this as we go through the entire course. Okay, a bureaucracy. Do you know what a bureaucracy is? It's like this. Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't it when the rich like own everything?
No,
No.
that would probably be like you're thinking like an oligarchy or
Yeah,
something.
sorry.
Yes.
Is it like just really, really
Complex government, and that could be your state government, or that could be the government of an institution, right? Now, let's just be honest. It does add organization. Like, let's look at, we have the iPad rollouts, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of glitches, and there's going to be the process of getting them out. We have to have an organization in place to do that, okay? But the problem, though, is that it builds, let me make sure I'm giving it to you this, it builds needless complexities, all right? Now, I'm not saying we're doing that here, but I'm just going to try to use an example. Let me use a fictional example. Okay. Let's say that you live in a particular street that needs a stop sign because it's a dangerous intersection. It's a two-way stop sign, and all the neighbors know it needs to be a four-way stop sign, okay? It wouldn't be right for you simply to go to Lowe's and be allowed personally to get a stop sign and plop it there, right? That would be very, very efficient, but we need something to protect just an individual doing what they want. So let's just say that there is a system involved with getting this, and I'm making this up. I don't really know what the system would be. So let's say that you have to go to the planning commission. Well, you have to go and talk to somebody, the secretary, to get on the planning commission's agenda. And then once you're on the agenda, maybe you'll have to meet and present your stuff in writing. So maybe you'll go and talk to these people, and the planning commission says, well, we need to know exactly how we feel this way. I mean, how many people feel this way? So we'd like you to get 1,000 signatures or whatever might be necessary in your neighborhood. So you go and do that. Now you submit it to the planning committee, and they say, well, we'll put it on our agenda this December, and then you can come in and present it. You go in and present it. They say, well, it seems like it's reasonable, but we're going to need some traffic studies. So they're going to put one of those little machines out there that measures how many people ride over it, God knows what, and then it has to go off, and then it has to be analyzed. The planning committee sees, hey, it looks like this should at least be considered. We'll send it off to council. Now you're off to council. You've got to get it on their agenda. Okay, we'll put you on the agenda for March. Things don't work out in March. It looks like June before you finally get in. And then it's an expense. What budget will this come out of? Do you see? It just grows and grows. Meanwhile, 2 kids got hit because everybody in the neighborhood knows there's supposed to be a stop sign there. Okay? So the problem is that it builds many needless complexities. It hasn't always been like this, right? Small businesses don't run on this. They don't have to. They have people that can close and make decisions. So there's a good parts to this, and there's also parts that don't help us. But nonetheless, the effects of it, right? First of all, there's nothing to add there. It can become very inefficient. Everybody knows we need a stop sign on that corner. Why did it take, 13 months and a lawyer and everybody else involved? Okay, so it builds these needless complexities, and it becomes very inefficient. There also tends to arise many, I'm going to say, dehumanizing aspects to this, right? We lose touch that we're actually talking about people that live there, and that there are children at risk. And we start to look at the bureaucracy itself as being more important than what it's doing. So it doesn't happen in this school, but if this were a really, really large school, your face might get lost in the crowd, and you're just a student ID. If you work for a very big organization, it could simply be that you're just a cog in the machine, all right? It's just one of the effects. Again, there's some good parts to bureaucracy, but it becomes inefficient, and there's many dehumanizing aspects. If we had more time, I would show you even in literature, okay? Franz Kafka is a big one. But anyway, we'll worry about that another day. Okay, so the third element then. Pluralism. This one is going to be very important for us to understand, especially when we get into morality next semester, but even this semester with various denominations, okay? It says there's many different value systems in the world, and they're all equally true and should be tolerated. There are many different value systems in the world, and they are all equally true and should be tolerated. Did anybody here have the seminarian, Mr. Max Ware, in your class at all last year? Do you remember him?
He the bald guy?
I don't know. I don't think he was bald. He's the guy who lost a lot of weight. So if you had him, he probably talked about that. Nice guy. Okay. Now he said he was in my junior class most of the time, so I don't know if he hit the sophomores. But he's in his early 20s, so he felt like he was in the same generation as you. And he said one of the problems with our generation is that we don't like making choices, because we realize every time you choose this, just by the nature of it, you do not choose something else. So we feel like we're being judgmental, is what he was saying. All right. So if you choose Christianity as what, the true religion, that could be your conviction, and then all of a sudden you feel judgmental because you're saying the other ones are not, or at least not, to the same degree. That's an issue. So we wind up in this pluralistic society thinking we have to find a way to all get along. Is the way to all get along by having what I'm going to call the lowest common denominator. Okay, so we can talk about that in terms of the effects. To get along, we choose the lowest common denominator. You see it sometimes in Christianity. Rather than disagree on certain things, what is something we could all agree on? Okay, now, you hear some people say, well, we all believe in God. Well, that's great. But if that was the lowest common denominator, we can include Satan into our group, because he too believes in God. Well, but we all think that, Jesus Christ is God incarnate. Okay, well.
Then you have divisions between Muslims and
Yeah, I mean, every time you make a choice, by nature, your choice is going to exclude something else. And that's necessary. But in a pluralistic society, we have a generation growing up that just thinks, we can't do it this way. We have to find ways to accept all people, which sounds good on its surface, but there's issues involved, right? So things like respect and toleration, they wind up becoming equated with acceptance. In other words, you don't respect me if you don't accept me the way I am. I want you to tolerate me, which you will learn next semester what tolerate means. It does not mean what you think it does. Toleration and acceptance become synonyms. It does not mean that. All right? So respect and toleration become equated with acceptance. So we have to then, if somebody thinks or acts differently than us, somehow we have to accept that. We do not. We can still make judgment. In other words, if you take this to its end, you no longer have things that are good or bad. You can't even call things good or bad. It's good for you, and it's bad for me. Well, that doesn't talk objectively about anything in the world. This is going to lead to indifferentism. So this is really going to play in our discussions on Friday. If I do choose this church and I call the truth, can I say it's only the truth for me? Well, then there's really no truth. It's just your truth and my truth and their truth. And we don't want to be judgmental, so we're going to tolerate and accept everybody. But it's impossible. It doesn't work, okay? It's not like I don't like it, even though I don't like it. Logically, it doesn't work. Every decision is a decision for something, but it excludes something. You're gonna do that when you go to college. You're gonna do that when you choose somebody to marry you. You name it. This is how we look in the world, but we have effects that come from our concepts of pluralism that we don't always recognize on the surface. Materialist or materialism, right? This is what I understand to be one of the most pervasive elements that leads people either to atheism or outside of the church. The funny thing is that they can't reconcile faith and science. And the reason why that is so funny is because, not want to say a majority, but so many of the founding fathers of modern science were Christians, most of them Catholic priests. What possible, objection would there have been? If people have a problem with evolution and think somehow that counteracts the Bible, not in the Catholic Church. I don't know who would have told you that. But anyway, this is what it leads to. So all that exists is material. It can be weighed and measured. Okay? So there's a growing trend that if I can't weigh and measure something, I can't really even call it true. That's materialism. All right? And the church has no problem, for example, with evolution until you bring materialism in. And I personally don't think anybody truly believes this. They just expound this a lot. I'm going to try to teach you the most profound things in your life. Love among them. Honor, truth, goodness. You can't measure any of those things. My wife loves me dearly. I can't prove it to you. I can't weigh it. I can't measure it. You say, well, maybe I can give you examples. Well, so what? People can do anything for you. doesn't mean that they love you. It could mean they want something from you. All right? So the most profound things in the world don't come from that. But materialism gives us that impression, right? So what it does is it creates an ideology. You may have heard the word scientism before, okay? Scientism is our way to differentiate an ideology from science, science proper. So scientism claims that only empirical, I don't want to say, I want to make it easy for you. Let's just say that only empirical proof is valid. So if you can't empirically prove something, then we don't really know if it's true. You may think that. If you think that unless something can be proved to you, I mean undoubtedly and empirically, then how do I really know it's true? You've already put yourself out of religion. I mean, without even realizing it. But you've also put yourself out of love and out of honor and out of goodness and out of beauty, out of all the most important things. It's funny, Winston Churchill, you guys all know who Winston Churchill is? Somebody asked him once during World War II, why there's such a concern for theater and the arts. Shouldn't these people be putting all their efforts, more into fighting and not in cultivating the arts and culture? And he looked at the person and he said, "Oh my God, what do you think we're fighting for? We want to win the war, so these are the greatest things our culture hands on. I mean, what do we treasure of cultures past? We treasure their arts and their accomplishment, their music, their writings. These aren't things you can empirically prove. So if you have a scientific mind, God bless you. But if you bring your scientific mind to bear and think that empirical proof is the only way to really know anything, you're really, really going to lower yourself throughout life in what you can enjoy and what you can know. All right, we'll talk more about that as things go. It also, ironically, gives the impression that atheism is like neutral. It's the objective position. So because you've probably heard the saying, well, all religions, all wars are probably based on some religion, and they can't get along. It's absolutely inaccurate, but it's very popular to say, and people often feel like they can't even defend the point, But atheism, because, in other words, if Christians can't really get along with the Muslims, and Muslims can't get along with Jews, and Jews can't get along with Buddhists, and so on, that doesn't make an atheist neutral. So we have to watch, even in our own country, what does it mean of separation of church and state? Does it mean that faith has no bearing on the morality upon which we base our laws? If you say yes, you're going to find yourself in a jam. Well, where do I get my morality from? Now, I can explain that to you. You may not like the answer, but it's going to be very practical. Okay? So anyway, we have to move beyond that. So materialist ethic. We have a society obsessed with information, right? So for us, knowledge is really about collecting data and facts. We have to collect data and facts to understand things better. Well, that misleads us. Okay, that misleads us that an idea or concept can really be determined by facts and data. So here you have, the majority rule idea. Well, we'll go with what the majority believes. By the way, when I see ideas, I'm using them in a way that you may not be familiar with. When I talk about things like truth, beauty, and goodness, truth is an idea. Beauty is an idea. Goodness is an idea. Justice is an idea. Equality is an idea. All right? These things, equality cannot be determined by a majority rule, nor can justice, nor can truth. So when we have, how many times have you seen people use polls to say, well, the majority of Catholics don't really believe that? I'm not being flippant when I say, who cares? A truth is a truth, whether there's one person in the world that agrees with it or not. A majority can only give you what they think. They can't determine truth, all right? nor can they determine goodness. If it was true in equalities, then no minority would ever have any rights. And if we were truly individualistic, no minority would have any rights, because we would look only what affects us, right? So minorities always, and all the minority populations throughout the world in time had to rely on the altruism of other groups to help protect them, right? So information becomes a right, where we must have access to unlimited information. Now, there's something good in here too, right? Scandals usually go on because people don't know what's going on. So if we were more informed, right? But that still doesn't solve it. We don't have unlimited rights and access to all the information out there. There are things that are private, okay? In other words, Marianne Glendon is a lawyer, I think from, I'm going to say Harvard, I could be wrong, and she wrote a book called Rights Talk, R-I-G-H-T-S, which means we have an entire generation that always talks in terms of rights. I have a right to this. I have a right to this. And she says they're absolutely misusing the word. In Catholic theology, you have no right that is not connected to a duty. If there's a duty that you are to perform as a human person, then you need the right to perform that. If there's no duty to it, then there's no right. Which is why animals don't have rights in the strictest sense. Okay, now don't ever interpret that like, well, then that means you can abuse them. No, it has nothing to do with that. But a right is connected to a duty, and a duty can only come to a rational person. Okay, that type of thing. Here's the other thing with information. I'm really behind here, I see. Without any real way to compare or determine if you have the complete information. How do you know? We should be. I'm going to put these up here, then I'll just be done. And that is it. So, how do you know if you have all the information? If you are poll-driven, how do you know everything's accurate? We rely on technology. It creates a dependence on this technology. So without Google, how will you learn? You know, I mean, I see it all the time when I edit papers for either people in my family or for grad students, and I see, you know, your point is off. Where did you get this information? Well, I, you know, key termed it through search engines. And no, you know, if that's information, that's not the same as knowledge. It hampers your education in the sense that, let me see how I want to say this to you. You can become easily overindulged with trivial things, okay? It's very easy when you are fact and data driven to overindulge with the trivial, because you're not making the connections. And the last but not least is really the worst. Information becomes confused with knowledge. They're not the same. You need information to build your knowledge, but too often we stop at the information level. So it's really great if somebody is good at trivial pursuit and they can spill out all those facts. Just as in probably a scripture course, it's really great if somebody can quote scripture and tell you Bible chapter and verse. But that doesn't mean that they got it right. That doesn't mean that what they are telling you fits into context, right? So these are just 5 elements. It's not meant to be exhaustive. It's just a real short snapshot of them. As we move on throughout this liturgy course, which is what sacraments is, I'll keep showing how these things show up.